My name is Devin Shaw. On behalf of Megan DiBartolo, Randy Papworth, Angelique Nixon, and Ben Moncrief, I'd like to thank you for joining us and allowing us the opportunity for this presentation. We are the RTO Implementation Committee from ESDC, tasked with identifying the risks of implementing the proposed directives surrounding RTO and social media use from the Treasury Board. We will also be presenting an alternative communication strategy that maintains the goals put forth by Minister Minetti and the Treasury Board, while hopefully facilitating a more efficient transition back to the office and reestablishing the values and ethics of the public service. While RTO directives are important across the public service, ESDC presents a unique case where such directives have impacted the department differently. The Minister has recognized the unique culture that the public service requires to operate efficiently for Canadians, a recognition that underlies our examination and consequently our recommendations. The key message we hope to convey to you through this presentation is that our proposed communication strategy is the first step in reestablishing ESDC public service ethics with the Treasury Board directives. Next slide, please. After careful examination of the information we received from the Senior Management Committee of ESDC, we understand the clearly identifiable issues of social media dissent and protest to RTO directives. While these are issues that ESDC is currently facing, they are not the underlying problem that we examined. Rather, these are symptoms of the problem we have identified, which is centered around a distancing from public service values and culture resulting from an elongated period of working from home. When referring to public service culture, we're referencing the core values which underpin what it means to be an effective public servant as outlined in the Code of Ethics. Thus, we identify the 5 main values of the Code of Ethics to be the same as those of the public service culture, which are respect for democracy, respect for people, integrity, stewardship, and excellence. These principles are associated with behaviors such as maintaining a duty of loyalty, fostering a safe and healthy workplace, demonstrating impartiality, effectively managing resources, and engaging in collaboration. Due to the momentous effects that COVID had on the realities of professional life, followed by the time workers spent in isolation, the emphasis on this culture was interrupted. Public actions taken by ESDC employees in protest to RTO on social media demonstrate a misalignment of the understanding of the role and responsibilities of a public servant between ESDC employees and upper management. The employees' frustration is understandable, as once again, some loss of ties to the public service culture was inevitable due to the effects of COVID. However, we believe that now is the time to reestablish the public service culture to provide meaningful and effective service for Canadians. The challenge we've identified is working out how to administer the directives set forth in the package while mitigating the risks associated with them. Next slide, please. So why and how are the proposed RTO directives relevant to ESDC? The ESDC harbors many public servants who provide service across the country. In particular, the department houses employment and training advisors who, by the nature of their job, may have to relocate once the RTO directives come into place. Much of this work is in remote, rural, and Indigenous communities. Sending them away from regional offices into communities where they are isolated from the rest of the public service may perpetuate the issues that we are currently trying to address regarding public service culture. On top of this, ESDC employees are voicing their concerns on social media, which is causing a disruption in public trust and program delivery, and directly goes against the code of conduct and ethics of the public service. These considerations display why action must be taken to address the underlying problems which provide fertile ground for issues such as these to arise. Next slide, please. Relating to the problem that has been previously identified, we believe the goal that the proposed directives is attempting to achieve is a rebuilding of the public service culture. This should be reflected through the department's communications. If the proper strategies are implemented, we believe that achieving this goal would lead to 3 main outcomes, which we've identified as program delivery, public trust, and employer trust. These outcomes, in combination with our proposed directive communication strategy outlined earlier, and already existing ethical frameworks, could provide the conditions necessary for the ESDC to operate as an ethical workplace. Next slide, please. Moving on to the implementation of our proposed communication strategy. It is important that the directive handed down to employees from ESDC management clearly communicates the 3 elements which we've identified as paramount. and we will elaborate on later within the proposed implementation plan. Balancing perspectives and needs, respecting existing ethics and code of conduct, and re-emphasizing proper outlets for grievances. Here we've identified the main inputs for the package, outlining directives that will be handed down to employees that contribute to the implementation of our proposed communication strategy. To demonstrate balancing perspectives and needs, we propose that ESDC management openly acknowledge that the department has an important role to play in the rebuilding of trust and that it does not all fall onto the employee. The concerns of the employees should be recognized through the clear outlining of the RTO directives. Additionally, ESDC should emphasize to their employees that by implementing RTO measures, they are rebuilding the public service to reflect the ethics and values of the Public Service Code of Conduct, and that a consultation procedure and in-depth review is underway to ensure that RTO measures are fairly enforced. Further, disciplinary measures may be necessary for expression rights issues. However, termination would not be the first course of action. ESDC management is encouraged to consult with stakeholders such as the union to better understand the concerns of ESDC employees. Consultation with the union should be clearly communicated with the employees to ensure that they understand that their voice will be heard throughout the implementation of these directives, and the values of the employee as expressed through the union will align with those of the department. Next, to communicate respecting existing ethics and code of conduct, we suggest that ESDC explicitly outline how operating in a manner consistent with existing ethics and code of conduct leads to the best overall service for Canadians. To support this claim, the ESDC can remind their employees of the public service bargain, which highlights the importance of behaving in a politically neutral manner and reporting to the government, but does not take away from the values of the employee. And finally, regarding re-emphasizing proper outlets for grievances, we advise the ESDC to reiterate the proper channels available for employees to disclose their grievances. Further, the risks of channeling grievances through social media should also be highlighted through upholding the public service value of duty of loyalty. ESDC employers are encouraged to engage with stakeholders such as the union as an effort to provide a proper avenue for ESDC employees to properly voice their concerns. Next slide, please.
Now that we've identified that the main goal of the directives proposed are to address the issues of a distancing from the public service culture, we can think about the different ways to communicate them to ESDC employees. The first option is to implement the proposal directive from the Treasury Board Secretariat as they are worded in the Action Plan on Social Media Use and RTO. The directive as written may not fulfill the conditions needed for the ESDC to be an ethical workplace, as it may not be directly related to employee and employer trust, public trust, or program delivery. Instead, it prioritizes upper management's perspective, enforces existing ethics and code of conduct while recommending disciplinary actions. This can be seen as a strategy that pushes, instead of guides, employees into compliance. This creates an environment that would see these issues becoming persistent, as it may not incentivize employees to respect their roles and responsibilities as public servants. Next slide, please. In order to flesh out and identify which option we prefer, we must look into the immediate, short, and medium-term effects of each communication strategy. The current communication of the directives deduced from the Action Plan on Social Media Use and RTO has immediate risks involved. Employees may feel unheard, we may lose employees through punitive measures or through perceived forced compliance, and the dissent on social media may not only persist, but it may escalate. Short-term risks include the potential lack of infrastructure for returning employees, ongoing protests from past employees and additional time and funds that would be needed to rehire and retrain new employees. The medium-term risk is that there would be a potential for decreased competitiveness within the public sector, and that this problem repeats and persists as the directives as they are now do not cultivate an environment where we can build public service culture. There are, however, a number of benefits to this communication plan as well. It achieves the goals of the minister while addressing social media dissent coming from disgruntled public servants within the ESDC. RTO directives would increase collaboration among public servants as they are returning to shared workspaces. While these may sound enticing to upper management, operating through such forceful mechanisms may have unintended effects where former employees continue to speak out on social media. As public servants ourselves, we are of the view that public servants are to loyally implement what their superiors have prioritized. But we are concerned that the current communications may not consider the concerns of employees, which may lead to a further breakdown in trust between them and the department. To mitigate this, we propose an alternative. Next slide, please. Our proposed alternative strategy would balance the perspective and needs of both the employee and the employer, ensuring the opinions of all stakeholders are heard and considered. It would respect existing ethics and code of conduct, building off the established principles that underlie the public service. Finally, it would emphasize proper outlets for grievances, pointing employees back in the direction of the established channels of communication within the department where their issues can be heard and considered. We believe this would create an environment where employee, employer trust, and public trust can flourish while program delivery is continuous and effective. Next slide, please. While we maintain that our proposed communication strategy is the preferred option, it does not come without its own set of risks. There is a potential lack of space and additional costs associated with the RTO directive, which have the potential to cause disturbance in all public service workplaces across the country and could persist through the immediate, short, and medium term. This problem exists in both proposals and is a consideration of the department and the federal public service. This is being addressed through the in-depth review regarding RTO orders and who is subject to them, but further examination of improving infrastructure will have to be considered. Another consideration is that public service culture change will not be an overnight accomplishment. You may not see the effects of this in the immediate term, but with a strong communication strategy coupled with the directives in place, we see a path forward where public service culture is rebuilt. Although there are risks to this communication strategy, they are outweighed by the potential benefits. In the immediate term, the minister's goals will still be realized as the Treasury Board directives will not be changed. The already established code of conduct and ethical framework will be re-emphasized explicitly, which rebuilds the public service culture instead of rebranding it. In the short term, employees will be back in the office for most of their working time, leading to an improved collaboration and increased program delivery. In the medium term, the public service culture will go through a rebuilding process. This should make social media dissent less likely and will grab the attention of a more appropriate talent pool for public service. Next slide, please.
Due to the public expression issue being particularly salient, we felt it was necessary to examine its impacts through the lens of immediate, short-term, and medium-term. The immediate risks are a potential alienation of employees and a potential perception of diminished freedoms associated with expression. Contrary to this, the benefits may be a mitigation of risk of employees speaking against senior management publicly. It also establishes a mechanism in which ESDC can utilize when addressing expression-related issues. In the short term, we've identified a potential risk that new hires may be dissuaded from the public service. However, the limiting of expression rights provides opportunities for employers to protect the interests and values of the ESDC. In the medium term, following a severing of ties, a possible risk is that former employees could be incentivized to continue to publicly speak against the ESDC. On the other hand, these directives could contribute to the reestablishment of the public service culture. ESDC is legally justified in imposing such expression rights directives following the precedent set in case law, in particular the Fraser case. The Fraser case clearly demonstrates that some minor levels of public expression from the public servants is tolerable, so long as it does not relate in any way to the duties of the public servant or their organization. With this in mind, there is an established framework for EDSC to address public servant expression in relation to employees protesting RTO measures. Next slide, please. This brings us to our rationale for the implementation of our proposed communication strategy for the ESDC department and its compliance with preset norms of the public service. By going forward with the Treasury Board directives, it is clear that public trust can be maintained through showing that the ESDC does not collapse when facing pushback by employees. Further, as depicted in the matrix, program delivery is also accounted for as the RTO goals of Minister Minetti are implemented and align with his initial directives. This also provides an opportunity to address employees who have gone against the Public Service Code of Conduct. As a result, this protects the interests of the ESDC. However, this may be at the expense of current and future employees, as they may see governmental institutions as unsafe and overly controlling. If the ESDC were to adopt our proposed communication strategy as shown in the matrix, it addresses all three areas in a positive manner. Employee trust is supported since it takes the perspectives of employees into consideration. Public trust is positively addressed as it improves collaboration between employees through balancing perspectives and needs, respecting existing ethics and codes of conduct, and re-emphasizing proper outlets for grievances. Additionally, program delivery is improved as it rebuilds the public service culture, attracts a larger talent pool, and there is less likely a chance for the same concerns to reoccur. Next slide, please. It is important to note that this strategy is the first step in a much larger project. We cannot change the culture of a workplace that spans across the country with one proposal. Our proposal communication plan addresses the directives set forth by the Treasury Board that will lead to the eventual strengthening of the public service culture. We believe this can be framed in a way that appeases public servants, their union, and management to mitigate potential disruption to program delivery. This is possible with the current ethical framework and code of conduct of the ESDC, as they are aligned with not only the public service bargain, but also the ethical framework of the union representing public servants. Next steps would be to consider new training mechanisms for the ethical framework, code of conduct, and public servants bargain to realign the roles and responsibilities of the entire public service. An ongoing PR strategy paired with collaboration with the union aligns with our communication strategy and can be utilized through providing workspaces with PR packages that include materials with ethical values, social media codes, public service bargain values, and mechanisms for sharing grievances that will be supported by union representatives. In terms of feasibility, the financial cost of the first step is low, as it addresses the framing of the directives and is not looking to change current ethical frameworks or codes of conduct. Once we get into the second and third steps via providing training and developing and implementing a PR strategy, we can see the possibility of cost of labor and resource arising. However, any costs incurred are in service to the larger goal of a strong public servants for ESDC and Canada. Next slide, please.
As we have demonstrated, there are two communication strategies available to the committee. Our proposed communication strategy does the best job at mitigating the risks involving public service employees' reactions and the environment ESDC has for public servants upon returning to office. Our proposed communication plan achieves our three outcomes that the committee will work through meeting the implementation of the directives. Trust between employees and upper management at ESDC, the trust that the public has in the public service at ESDC, and finally, program and service delivery from ESDC. These three outcomes are vital to the rebuilding of a strong, robust, and ethical workplace culture for the public service at ESDC. Our proposed communication plan achieves these outcomes through its work of balancing perspectives and needs of public servants and management, respecting the existing ethics and code of conduct, and by re-emphasizing proper outlets for grievances. This brings us back to our key message that we began with and highlights the goal of reestablishing public service culture and ethics. The proposed communication strategy is the first step in reestablishing ESDC public service ethics with the Treasury Board directives. As presented, the senior management can use this message moving forward to highlight their work with implementing the directives from the Treasury Board as part of a future-oriented plan for the public service. This long-term vision also works to incorporate employees in being a part of shaping what an ethical workplace is for ESDC. Next slide, please. On behalf of myself and the rest of the presenting members of the RTO Implementation Committee at ESDC, we thank the Management Committee members who joined our presentation today. We welcome your questions at this time.
Well, I wanted to give you guys a huge thanks for all the work you did. Obviously, in a week, you don't have a lot of time for work, and it was the middle of reading week for lots of universities. So I do want to thank you, and thank you for all your effort and for presenting us a very interesting perspective. I'm going to pass it over to my ESDC senior management colleague, Guy Giorno.
So thank you. I found the presentation very easy to follow and clear, and the slides are very well laid out. I just wanted to ask some very pedestrian questions to make sure I understand correctly. Can we go to slide 5, please? I understand, if I understand correctly, this is your recommendation. Can we go to slide 6? This is not what you're recommending, it's what you believe TBS is proposing. Slide 7, please. Not what you're recommending. Slide 8, please. What you are recommending. Slide 9, please. What you are recommending. Did I get that correct? On all
Yes.
counts?
Yes, that is correct.
Can we please then go to slide 10? Does this apply to what TBS is recommending or both?
Thank you for the question. The expression, before I hand it off to my colleague, Angelique, just very briefly, the expression rights was something we considered for both. To speak more on that, I'll hand it off to Angelique now.
Thank you for your question. So yes, this is relating to both RTO measures as well as the social media restraints that are proposed by the ESDC directives that are outlined in the case. We wanted to include this, the risks and benefits, to show what would happen if we were to implement the directives as presented without making any kind of, I guess, additional edits to it in terms of creating the implication process. So what we wanted to do was highlight a communication strategy that allows to push the directives outlined in the case, and while also addressing the risks and the benefits of them. And we did that on the crutch of the Fraser case that was also mentioned in the package to create, to address the precedent that was outlined that allows the ESDC to justify the measures that they are proposing. However, just changing up the communication and clearing out why they are setting the implications regarding the RTO measures and the social media directives that are being pushed by ESDC.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Guy. Nancy, over to you.
Thank you. I guess I'll give an opportunity here just for additional comment and detail. Always very interested in the linkage or the nexus between these two directives. Obviously, when relating to the prohibition on public servants and their use of social media, but then also the return to the office. And so in crafting your recommended communication strategy, can you just share with us some of the thinking or analysis that you undertook around the interaction between those two directives being rolled out at the same time frame?
Thank you, Nancy. Before I hand that off to my colleague, Megan, that's something we definitely considered, understanding the connection. As you say in your question, open for comment, there is definitely a strong connection between these two. And I'll pass it off to Megan to speak more on that.
Yes, thank you for the question, because it allows us to dive more into our rationale as to why we decided to go this route. The first thing we did was go through the risks of both directives as they are in the package, how they were recommended to us. The risks in the immediate and short term were quite similar, where it's going to cause a mass confusion and a breakdown of trust in the public service. Sorry, my cat is meowing. And what we did there was we went into the medium and long-term effects of the directive, which were both that the public service culture would be built, like it would build over time. So we kind of seen how it would get to that point and how we could get there a little quicker. And it came from, well, how do we communicate these differently in a way that will help us get there quicker and will help mitigate the risks that we're seeing in both the directives. So we just kind of looked at both of them, saw the risks as they were, and that they would eventually arrive to a point where we could create a stronger public service culture, from stopping dissent in social media and having people return into workplaces where they would be able to create that culture within themselves in the offices. So that's kind of how our rationale came from with how we got to doing a communication strategy.
Thank you so much.
My colleague Stefania, what are your, you have a question for the team?
Thanks, Noah, and thank you for the presentation. So I like how you had very clear outcomes, and they were employee-employer trust, public trust, and program delivery. So my question is, how will you measure success of your recommended approach? And given one of the outcomes is public trust, how will you measure whether public trust is being increased, or like how are you going to integrate that in terms of knowing that you're successful with the plan?
Thank you. Before I hand that off to my colleague Devin, it sounds like you're wanting some more clarification on how we're measuring success in general for both sort of the ideas of these pillars and then specifically for public trust. To speak more on that, I'll hand it off to Devin now.
Thanks for the question. I think that's really important for us to further clarify. Would it be possible to go back to slide 5, I believe? Oh, sorry, slide 6. Sorry about that. One more, please. One more. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, so to answer your question, yeah, obviously these are the 3 outcomes we have identified, and the reason we did identify it this way is because we feel that they really play off of each other, and they kind of work in coherence with each other. So as you brought up about public trust, we felt that the main sort of the main thing we wanted to mitigate in terms of public trust, the main effect on public trust right now, is that sort of social media sort of backlash that we're receiving from some ESDC employees. Obviously, when public servants who are tasked with implementing government directives are speaking out against those directives and against their superiors, public trust is going to degrade. It's not a good look. It's not something that we want to convey to the public, that that their government who is tasked with providing them services is sort of having these internal issues. So the main way that I think we can measure public trust improving is just a sort of cleanup of that social media issue. If there's less and less social media issue, and it's not going to happen overnight, we acknowledge that, but over this sort of short term after we implement these directives, if we see a decrease in social media backlash, we think that public trust will sort of come along with that. And then the other part of that is program delivery. Part of these RTO directives, if they're done correctly, will bring people back to the office, allow them to collaborate, and then deliver programs efficiently for Canadians, which will then help restore that public trust. Thanks again for the question.
Thank you. Can I have a follow-up, Noah?
Go for it.
Yeah. Okay, so what do you think is going to be some of the what will be some of the easier aspects in terms of implementation of your strategy, and then what do you think will be some of the more challenging aspects of it?
Thank you for the question and the follow-up. If I could speak to some of the easier aspects, I think we've identified our first step, and we sort of imagine our strategy as being long-term. Again, rebuilding public service culture is a long-term goal. So our initial aspect of communicating these directives in a way that takes into account the role of the employee is very important in that, and that will come easier. However, what we've identified to come later, such as the trainings, the PR packages, and sort of this ongoing role, will take a bit more work and will carry more cost and also employee power and management power to implement the strategy moving forward. So initially, we've identified an easier process, and then again, it will come with a bit more implication, but always serving this long-term goal of rebuilding public service culture and ethics. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's a nice way to end. Thank you so much, team, for your presentation.